Welcome to Chapter 4, Carbohydrate, Sugar, Starch, Glycogen, and Fiber. What are carbohydrates? Part 2 by Professor Tammy. Learning objectives. 1. Explain how plants synthesize carbohydrates. 2. Explain what carbohydrates are. 3. Describe how carbohydrates are converted to glucose in the human body. 4. Explain how carbohydrates are needed in the diet. 5. Explain what foods contain carbohydrates. 6. Explain how we use carbohydrates.
Carbohydrate is made by photosynthesis. It contains the sun's radiant energy. Green plants, like leafy green plants, they have photosynthesis, which converts carbon dioxide and water in sun's energy through their enzyme and create glucose and oxygen. Plants do not use all of their energy stored in their sugar, and when their energy are stored as sugar in them, it's called starch. For us, it will be called glycogen. That's our stored sugar. Carbohydrate-rich foods are plants and milk. So let's look at the picture over here. So you see that the sun, energies from the sun, goes to the plant. Carbon dioxide from the air goes to the plant. Water goes to the plant. When you combine all these together, just like here, and the enzyme that the plant has, then it outputs oxygen from the plant to the air for us to breathe, and glucose stored in the plant as starch. So here it is. So you can look at it in words, in elements, and also in picture. What are carbohydrates? Carbohydrates, one of the 3 macronutrients. Do you remember what the 3 macronutrients are? Yes, it's carbohydrates. What's the second one? Fat or lipids. What's the third one? Protein. So carbohydrates are an important energy source, especially for the nerve cells. Carbohydrates are composed of the atoms carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So good sources of carbohydrates include fruits, vegetables, and grains. Glucose. They're the most abundant carbohydrate. They're produced by plants through photosynthesis, which we just spoke about in previous slides. The preferred source of energy for the brain is glucose. So what happens when glucose runs out? Then the brain uses fat as an energy source. So remember, the primary source of energy for the brain is glucose. The secondary source of energy for the brain is fat. Glucose is also an important source of energy for all cells. What are carbohydrates? Carbohydrates are the ideal nutrients. They meet body's energy needs because if you're going to move around, move your muscles, use your brain, you need carbohydrates. Because carbohydrates feed the brain and the nervous system. It keeps your digestive system fit and keep your body lean. You're like, whoa! I thought carbohydrate makes you fat or makes you gain weight. Well, let's go through this chapter before you bring that carbohydrates are bad for you to that conclusion. So in this chapter, we're going to talk about digestible and indigestible carbohydrates and complex versus simple carbohydrates. So most monosaccharides are converted to glucose by the liver. Glucose is released into the bloodstream to provide immediate energy. Excess glucose is converted to glycogen and stored in the liver and muscles. So you're like, those words sound foreign. So let me explain them. Most monosaccharides are these sugar molecules, which we will be speaking about soon, and they get changed to glucose by the liver. So the liver changes them. So we can use glucose for our body. And this glucose is then released. It goes into the bloodstream so we can have energy. So when you have too much glucose in your body, your body can only use so much. So that glucose is changed to glycogen. And glycogen means stored glucose. That means this glucose is being stored in your body. And it's stored in your liver. And it's stored in your muscles. So just FYI, glucose that's stored in your muscles, even if your brain needs it to think, the brain can use their secondary source, which is fat. So when you run out of glucose, the brain uses fat. So going back, so if your muscles still have glucose storage and the other parts of your body don't, your muscle is not going to give glucose to the other parts of the body. This glucose that your muscle has is going to keep for itself. So just as a review, glucose is what's being released into your bloodstream that you're using, the energy, the sugar, the carbohydrate, the energy that you're using. Glycogen is the stored glucose that's being stored in your liver and muscles for later use. And you're like, wow, so whatever carbohydrates I have, it's just all going to be stored. Okay, hold on there. Anything extra becomes fat. So just a FYI, any extra carbohydrate turns into fat. Any extra protein turns into fat, which we will also discuss later in the protein chapter. And any extra fat remains as fat. So you're wondering, why carbohydrates? So what do carbohydrates do in the body, and what do carbohydrates do in food? Carbohydrates in the body, they're good energy sources, glucose storage, raw materials, structures and functions, digestive tract health, blood cholesterol, blood glucose, satiety, and body weight. For energy source, sugars and starch from the diet provide energy for many body functions. They provide glucose. The preferred fuel for the brain and nerves is glucose. So if glucose runs out, especially for the brain, what do they use? Does it just stop using energy? No, the secondary source of energy for the brain is fat. Glucose storage. Muscles and liver, glycogen. They store glucose. So glycogen, it's the name of stored glucose. So muscles store glucose. So if the other parts of your body run out of glucose, muscle does not share their glucose with the other parts of the body. Hint. Raw material. Sugars are converted into other compounds, such as amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. And amino acids are not the same as proteins. You have to have the 9 essential proteins, essential meaning that you need to consume it, to say, okay, I have complete protein. And there's 11 non-essential amino acids, which we will go over in the protein chapter. Structures and functions. Sugar interact with protein molecules affecting their structures and functions. Digestive tract health. Fibers help to maintain healthy bowel function, so it reduces risk of bowel diseases. Blood cholesterol. Fibers promote normal blood cholesterol concentration, which reduces risk of heart disease. So we're going to talk more about that in the fat chapter. Blood glucose. Fibers modulate blood glucose concentration, which helps control diabetes. Satiety. Fibers and sugars contribute to feelings of fullness. So when you eat more fibrous kind of foods, you will feel fuller faster than if you ate foods that did not have fiber. Body weight. A fiber-rich diet may promote a healthy body weight. It's because when you get fuller faster, you're not going to eat as much. Because fibrous foods tend to slow down the digestion. So you're like, oh, I'm full now. Versus if there was no fiber, like, yum, 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 you keep eating. So when you keep eating, you tend to eat more. But fibers tell your stomach, since it digests slower, you're like, oh, I kind of feel full. I think I should stop eating. Carbohydrates in foods. Why is carbohydrates important in foods? Flavor. Flavor, flavor. Sugars provide sweetness. E. Browning. When exposed to heat, sugar undergo browning reactions, lending appealing color, aroma, and taste. So if you ever try to make your own candy, you kind of heat up the sugar and it kind of melts too and kind of turns brown a little bit. Texture. Sugars help make food tender. Cooked starch lends a smooth, pleasing texture. Gel formation. Starch molecules expand when heat and trap water molecules, forming gels. The fiber pectin forms the gel of jellies when cooked with sugar and acid from fruit. Bulk and viscosity, which means thickness. Carbohydrates lend bulk and increase viscosity to foods. Soluble viscous fibers lend thickness to foods such as salad dressings. So, if there was no carbohydrates in it, it would be very thin. Moisture. Sugars attract water and keeps food moist. So when you think about, you have a little small bowl of sugar and then you put water in there. What happens to the water? The sugars absorb it. Preservation. Preserving food. Preservative. Sugar in high concentrations dehydrates bacteria and preserves the food. So you're wondering, when you go to a supermarket, how could some of those foods stay there for such a long time? Because when sugar's in food, it's in the pores of the food. So when they're in the pores of the food, bacteria cannot thrive or even be there. There's no water for bacteria to reproduce, so they kind of just dehydrate because remember, sugar kind of draws water. Fermentation. Carbohydrates are fermented by yeast, a process that causes bread dough to rise and beer to brew, among other uses. So if you make your own pizza dough or your bread dough, you have to add a little bit of sugar because that kind of activates the yeast and like, woo, and the yeast go, yes, I want to grow and be a little more fluffy here. So that helps so again, sugar helps fermentate the yeast.
See you soon. And remember to read the book.